I actually made that last starter video to make this video. This starter just wasn't putting out enough power to give it a good demonstration of how it sounds when the starter clutch fails. So I put the new starter on it. I forgot to disconnect the spark plug wire. It actually cranked up with the starter. The starter stayed engaged and it blew the starter up. But the sounds you'll hear demonstrate this sound. The other sound is, that I couldn't do, and this starter doesn't have enough power to do it. The bike will crank up, it'll almost start, and then it'll die and make a clunking sound. And you'll hear a clunking sound down here in the engine. And that's pretty common too, where the starter stays engaged. And when it does start, it's got a whining sound to it. It doesn't really take off. It just makes a strange whining sound. So you pull your brand new starter back off. You take these screws out of the back of the starter, and the starter will come apart. I have a video on how to rebuild these starters, and stuff falls out of it. Look at that. That's been overspun. You can see where it slung everything apart. It was just spinning too fast. It all got chewed up inside there. Spun the brushes apart. Just destroyed everything. Why did that happen? See what's behind door number 1 here. That's how it's sitting in its resting form, ready to start. What's going on here is the starter spins this gear right here. The little 9-tooth starter gears engage that, and then that in turn is on a shaft. It turns this. That's one piece. That turns this starter gear. It spins the engine forwards. This is just like the rear end on your bicycle, just like a transmission in a helicopter. This is a sprag clutch. There's you can see little dogs in there. And this sprag clutch, what it does, if you turn it one way, it'll actually turn the engine. If you spin it the other way, just like your pedals on your bicycle, you can stop spinning your pedals and the wheel will keep turning, even though your pedals aren't turning. And think of this as your pedals in your chain. This thing spins one direction, turning the engine. Once the engine starts, this shaft speed becomes higher than the starter speed, and this just overrides it, and the starter just sits there. This gear sits there, this gear sits there, the starter gear sits there. It's all still engaged, but it's not doing anything because this sprag clutch with these dogs in it is allowing this shaft to turn faster. So this will just stay put, just like when you stop pedaling on your bicycle. Your feet stay put, but your back wheel keeps on going. The problem is when these things wear out, they stay engaged. So when the engine is spinning, that gear should not be spinning, but you can see it is, which in turn is spinning this idler gear, which in turn is spinning that starter. So as this engine gets up to speed, 1,000 RPM or so, it's going faster than that starter can handle. And the starter flies apart internally because this should not be spinning. That should be stationary. And that's a failure of your starter clutch. No bueno. You might need one of these. I'll put a link in the description. You definitely want one of these. I'll put a link in the description. Thread it on to the left. Get it deep as you can. Then run that in there. That's going to pull it off. You want a big old 15/16 or a crescent wrench will work. Hold that flywheel from turning. 17mm socket on there. And go in the clockwise direction. Pulls it right off. Easy as pie. You can get rid of this. If you have one of these Gen 4, Gen 5 style exhaust mounts, take the lower one off. Needed an extension. Leave that top one on there. It's a good time to change the oil. Put your bolts where they go so you don't mix them up. Here's the money shot. Pretty good placement. Just leave all those wires in the stator and everything installed. So I've cleaned up my two mating surfaces. You'll need a new gasket, and the gasket's the one with that funny looking triangle in it. Matches up right down there. When you're buying gaskets, I'll put a link in the description. It's cheaper, or just as cheap, to get the whole gasket set as it is to get either this gasket or the gasket for the rear end. So it pays just to get the whole gasket set. I think it's still under 10 bucks, and just this gasket's like $9.95, so that's the way to go. Just get the whole set. There's two dowel pins to line everything up with. Don't lose those. One goes here, and one goes up here. When I ordered my starter clutch, I also ordered an extra one of these nuts that hold it on. The chances of me tearing this thing up, getting it off, are pretty great. But you can see the threads are counterclockwise. So I'm turning it to the left and it's tightening on. So we know we have to turn it clockwise to loosen it. The hierarchy is we're going to try our tool. Don't be surprised if these castle nut tools fail on you and don't work. We're going to try it with an impact gun. If that doesn't get it off, we're going to try it with an air impact gun. Pneumatic. If you don't have that, your next step, you're gonna just tear this thing up. You're gonna go to a chisel and your BFH, big frickin' hammer. To get it to come off, you might want to hit it with some heat. So if you heat this nut up, it's gonna expand. This nut's gonna heat way faster than this whole shaft. So this nut's gonna expand. You just toss some fire right on there, and you'll be able to loosen that. So let's try the proper tool first. You want it spinning clockwise, and it is. It worked. Nice. And don't forget this washer that was stuck on the front of your old starter clutch. We'll put that back on right before the nut. So as your old starter clutch wears out, you can see the little bearings in there. Those are the rollers, which are kind of egg-shaped, giving it that sprag clutch function. And this one's completely frozen. You can't spin it one way or the other, so it's completely locked up. But if you notice, the gap down here is much littler than the gap up here. The whole thing is felled and it's off center. That's why when you start your bike, it'll kind of crank and it'll stop. And the starter won't start it anymore. It'll be frozen until you move your Kickstarter. It's binding up here because it's off center. And then once it gets past that high side, then it will crank again and kick again. But that's why it binds up. If you look really close, you can see it's actually cracked right there, broken. This side you can see it better. So the new starter clutch, you can see it spins one way real freely, and then does not spin the other way. And this is like an upgraded one, the heavy duty one. It has more of these little roller cams in it that work as a sprag clutch. So it shouldn't fail and get off centered like this one did. There's a keyway, line that up. Make sure your keyway's in place up here. Perfect. I'm using the new nut. Now you can see the engine re-rolls forward. It doesn't turn the gears, but if you go backwards, it does. So that's working correctly. Let's see how it starts now. Ah, perfect. Oh, what's amazing is how much smoother that engine runs. What a difference. Yeah, the whole
whole bike's a lot smoother. Wow, who would have thought that?